Good afternoon, friends. It is good to see you all here, and we welcome our friends on Zoom. This is the second in our series, Climate in Crisis, What Can I Do? The issue of the climate is of significant importance. And so we take this opportunity to get together in this forum. Today, we're lucky enough to have some politicians with us. Thank you very much for coming. Kate Thwaites, Vicki Ward, and Ben Ramacharan, thank you, sorry. Thank you for giving us your time, and we look forward to what you have to say. The way today will work is I will introduce the first speaker, and then they'll speak. And while they're talking, if you have some questions, there was a slip of paper that you were given coming in. Pop your question down, and at the end of the speaker's talk, hold up and we during our panel. Now, I wanted to remind everyone, have you all signed in? Wonderful, that's excellent. If you haven't, can you please do that? There's opportunity to do that at the front. We thank you to our SAGE group, and especially to Mitzi for all the work that you have done in putting this together. It is a wonderful opportunity. We will make a start. Kate Thwaites was elected Jaga 20 and lived down. Kate is a former ABC TV and radio reporter and has held several and the Victorian Public Service. She worked for Jenny Macklin, helped live important labour reforms, including the National Disability Insurance Scheme and paid parental leave. Kate ran for Parliament because she believes we need a new energy to tackle the big challenges facing us. We are facing a climate emergency, absolutely. And our community has made that very clear to us, and I'm sure clear to you, Kate. The urgent need to act on climate change is one of the biggest issues raised by local residents. Kate and Labor believe that we should be investing in job-creating renewable energy future, urgently reducing emissions and protecting our local environment. Kate is also working to tackle the other serious challenges that face our country, raising social inequity, constitutional recognition of Australia's First Peoples, and fixing the National Disability Insurance Scheme. What a job ahead of you. Well, today, the job ahead of you is to come and speak. Would you welcome, please, Kate Thwaites.
Thank you, and thank you for that warm introduction. I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on and paying my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I do want to start by saying a big thank you for holding this forum today and having Vicki and councillors along with me to speak to you all. This is so important, and I know that all of you sitting in this room here know how important it is because that's why you're here. So the challenge all of we have, and the challenge that I have in particular as your federal, or as some of your federal representative, is I note that probably the federal representative that a lot of you have, Kevin Andrews, decided not to come for that. But the challenge I have is to change this debate. Because as you just heard, one of the big reasons why I put my hand up to stand for federal politics and to get myself elected to our national parliament was because I believe that the toxic climate wars that have happened in this country for more than a decade have to end. We are past the stage where we can treat this as a political plaything, where the need for urgent action on climate change is weaponised continually for electoral purposes. That is not going to serve us. It hasn't served us. From a Labor perspective, it's been incredibly harmful for us. You know, if I'm honest with all of you in the room, it's one of the reasons why we don't have a Labor government in Canberra and why we haven't had a Labor government in Canberra since Tony Abbott first weaponised this in 2013 and chucked out Julia Gillard. So there is a really big task ahead of us as a Labor Party. And as I said to you, one of the reasons I put my hand up for federal parliament was because I want to be part of the Labor caucus doing that and making sure that this country gets onto the right track for action and genuine action on climate change. And I will say to you today that actually I feel more hopeful about that at the moment than I have for quite some time. And in many ways, that's not because of what's happening right here in Australia, because you all would have heard in the last few days, you would have heard Scott Morrison pull out the same tired rhetoric the other night when he gave a speech to the Business Council, and he said, well, this policy won't be decided in the inner city wine bars and coffee shops. Oh, no, 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 no. This is, this is about coal and it's about exports. The rhetoric of setting communities against each other in this country that has been so divisive, the rhetoric we've got to move beyond, he is still harking back to. But last night or the night before, Scott Morrison had to front up to an international climate summit where he was absolutely the outlier. And what we have at the moment is a game changer, and that game changer is the election of Joe Biden. And what that is doing, both internationally and here in Australia, is resetting this debate from one which I think probably all of us in this room would feel very much there is a moral imperative to act on climate change. And we argue in those terms, and I put myself in that. But that argument has been, let's be honest, ineffective over the last 10 years. And what is happening now is this debate is being reset to an economic argument. It is being reset to an argument about jobs and the economy and a clean economy going forward. And I'm excited about that because I think that gives us a fresh opportunity to get to the space where we need to get genuine action in this country on climate change. And if we don't, we will just be left behind internationally. So the investment that Biden is putting into clean technology and the jobs that come with that is massive. A $1.7 trillion investment over 10 years into clean energy technologies. Achieving zero carbon power generation in 15 years is the target in the US. Installing 500 million solar panels by 2025. Advancing electric vehicles, building a national vehicle charging network, accelerating the smart grid and battery storage, scaling up tax credits for renewable technologies, and nurturing next generation energy sources like hydrogen and advanced nuclear power plants. So that's a ambitious but genuine commitment with a lot of money behind it. And so that's where the US is going to go. We see in Europe similar initiatives. The UK has a very ambitious climate target now. And what all of this will mean for Australia economically is if we don't get with the program, we're going to be locked out of those markets. Europe's flagged that it will put tariffs on goods that aren't made in a clean way. So it will actually start to hurt our economy to not make this switch. So we've got a real opportunity ahead of us, in fact, because as you all know, Australia has so many of the resources that mean we can be a renewable energy superpower. We can build jobs, we can build clean technology, and we can actually be exporting that to the rest of the world so that this is what our economy becomes built on. And from a Labor perspective, that's really where we're trying to focus on. How do we, if and when we get into government, how do we make that shift? How do we use the levers of government to push that along so that we get the climate action we need? The first thing from a Labor perspective that's really important, obviously, is we set a target. So we are committed to net zero emissions by 2050. And I will note that that is still a commitment that the Prime Minister refuses to make. But alongside that, so, commitment, target, incredibly important. Business says that's incredibly important. Everyone needs certainty about where we're heading. So that will drive a lot of investment decisions. But alongside that, we need to know where else will government put its money and where would it focus? So some of the things that Labor has put forward in this is that we will have a $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. So that's about getting manufacturing back in Australia and strategic industries that will create the jobs of the future. And very much the priority in that fund is about focusing on low emission technologies and renewables manufacturing so that we can get that industry really booming in Australia. Another policy that we've announced at this stage is a $20 billion fund to rewire the nation. So most of you are probably pretty familiar with solar technology. I imagine quite a few of you have solar panels on your roof. What you also probably know is that the grid we currently have set up is not set up for all of you having solar panels on your roof. Our grid was built back in the day where our electricity supply was one way. You know, it was generated down in the Latrobe Valley. It came here via big cables into our homes. There was no setup where it comes back from your house into the grid. And so what we see across the country at the moment is the grid failing at times, is us not being able to harness the full potential of solar because the grid is just not up to purpose. And AEMO, the regulator, has found that as well. So that's very much, again, why we put that policy out there, that we need to focus on that. Recently, we made an investment in community batteries. So again, same idea. How do we start to harness much better the potential of all this solar that is out there in Australia? So a $200 million investment in 400 community batteries around the country. And again, as you would all know, the technology for batteries is advancing quickly. And so what those community batteries will mean, particularly for people who are in a situation where can't afford a battery for themselves, they might be renting, they will be able to feed into a battery in a community hub, and you almost have your own little electricity hub in that sense, where you'll all put in and draw out of the same source. And the final piece of policy that we've announced so far is to make electric vehicles cheaper. So again, you know, this is an area where Australia is so far left behind. You know, around the world, car makers are no longer doing any sort of research and development on the type of cars that we are still driving. They know the future's in electric vehicles. And, you know, I had a colleague describe it to me this week as, you know, on current trajectory, we'll end up as sort of the Cuba of the world. You know how people go to Cuba to look at those sort of, you know, 50s cars that are stuck there from the, because, you know, the trade barrier came down with the US and the rest of the world. That will sort of be us. I mean, our cars aren't as colourful and, you know, picturesque as that, but we really will be. We'll be the only people in the world driving these incredibly polluting vehicles. So it is really important that we have incentives to drive down the cost of electric vehicles. And that's where our commitment to remove some of the taxes on those vehicles is really important and could cut the cost of those cars by $9,000. And we know, again, that a lot of people want to buy an electric vehicle, but the cost here in Australia at the moment is just prohibitive. So all of that is to say, I think things are shifting here in Australia. From a Labor perspective, we will have more policies that we put out before the federal election, so you can expect to hear more from me and from others about what our policies will be in this space. But as I said to you, our commitment is clear, net zero 2050. We know how we're going to get there, and we know that this argument has to be an argument about our economy and our jobs going forward. And I'm excited about the potential that there is there for our country to become a renewable energy superpower, for us all to consume electricity in a really different way, for us to, once again, manufacture things and to export clean green products around the world. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to answering questions later.
Thank you, Kate. It's great to hear from you. Opportunity now for questions. If you have some questions for Kate, you see the lovely Karen with their tubs. If you pop your question up, they'll come around and collect it. Should say while that was happening, the group put to, I don't want you to think this is a Labor Party event, far from it. Ben, you represent the Greens, but also asked sides of Parliament to come along. So that was there in our planning. Vicki, hello. Thank you again for coming and for sharing with us today. Vicki also grew up in research. Did you two know each other? Oh, Rosanna Research. There we go. So Vicki grew up in research, not Rosanna, and has lived, studied and worked in our community for most of her life. While first drawn to politics by the Tasmanian dams issue in the 1980s, when she was just a child, I believe, it was the unfair drastic cuts to hospitals and schools by the Kennett government which led her to join the Australian Labor Party in 1996. Vicki was elected to represent the Eltham district in 2014 and loves representing an area that reflects so many of her own values and core beliefs. A community that feels connected to each other, believes in persevering our natural environment, supporting quality schools and education, and believes in fair and good access to healthcare, as well as creating employment and training opportunities. Vicki believes in positive action on climate change rather than relying on the negative fear-driven politics. The Andrews government, like the Australian Labor Party federally, have a target of net zero emissions by 2050. And Vicki recognises that those in our community who may not recognise the science of climate change or who feel overwhelmed by the seriousness of the issue. She believes in a positive way of reaching these people and helping them support emissions reduction. Vicki also supports the big picture projects such as solar farms springing up across our state, the growth in wind farms, increased public transport, just to name a few. Thank you, Vicki Ward.
It's funny, I come to these things, I have this pen behind my ear, yet I'm working off this. Go here. Thank you, Christopher. I also acknowledge the Wurundjeri, the traditional owners in the land in which we gather today, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And yes, I also thank St Margaret's today, the Sage Group and Mitzi for the work that you've done. It is terrific to have such a strong social group, such a strong social conscience that covers so many areas that you do. I acknowledge Kate. Now I understand that Frances, there is an apology today, but there is a video that she's done, which is terrific. And we've got Councillor Ben Ramacharan, which is wonderful to see him here. And it is wonderful to see the transformation of our local government over the last 6 or so months and the positive ways in which they're going about their work. So yes, as has been mentioned, my family did come here in the early 70s. We came here, there was a little bit here, but not a lot. Woodridge didn't exist, and it was a dirt road to Greensborough. And there has been a fair bit of change since the early 70s. We came because land here was affordable. My parents appreciated the beauty of the area, but they could also afford to live here. Mum grew up in public housing in Faulkner and my dad grew up in Brunswick, and coming out here was, as you would expect, a breath of fresh air, and the fact that they could afford to live here was transformative for them and for my family. They loved the natural landscape that they found around them. So as a kid, you grow up, you're on a dirt road, there's a farm opposite, you take it all for granted. You don't really necessarily understand how precious it is and how much it needs to be protected. So with the 1983 election, I was still at high school. I wasn't as young as you might have intimated before, Christopher, but I appreciate that. Thank you. The Franklin Dam was an issue, and it was one that really galvanised a lot of us at high school, just as you're seeing kids now so agitated about climate change for action and so on. We were the same around the Franklin Dam, but it was also nuclear power, nuclear weapons that really galvanised us as well. And for me, they were my two political awakening or waking points, I guess you could say, that really got me fired up. And I have to say that nuclear power and nuclear weapons is something that I still can't budge on. It's interesting how you can be formulated by something at a young age and you just can't move on it. And so here I am many years later, a local MP who absolutely accepts the science of climate change, as does the party that I represent. And I guess what I'm presenting is a bit of a bookend with what Kate has said. Kate has spoken about the aspirations of federal Labor, and I can talk about what state Labor is doing. So I welcome the work that the Labor state government is doing to address climate change. So it's simple things such as supporting domestic solar and making it more affordable for people to access solar panels, whether it is powering our strand through solar. We changed the law back to after the election in 2014 to make these people who invest in wind farms. it's been quite difficult between 2010 and 14 for wind farms to be built. It's now much easier. We're also creating the biggest battery in the country with a 300 megawatt big battery to be built in Moorabool near Geelong. Through the climate change in 2016, Victoria has led a long time of net zero emissions by 2050. In 2019, we legislated increased Victorian renewable energy target, the VRET, of 50% renewable energy generation by 2030. As some of you might have already read, that over summer we already achieved that target over a number of days, where we did have 50% of the energy generated in this state was through renewable sources. Now, this is the first time that that has ever happened. We smashed our 25% renewable energy target in 2020, and we're on our way to hit 40% of renewable energy by 2025 and 50% by 2030. So, problem, it's the bike. Sorry, I'll use a bigger voice. The increased VET target provides industry with the long-term certainty needed for the new investment in renewable energy projects in Victoria. It helps businesses understand, it gives them the certainty, it helps them understand and gives them a playing field that they need in order to plan their businesses. And this is one of the challenges that Kate was talking to, is that with the federal government being the way they are, it is really hard for big businesses to invest in this country and to understand what we will do with energy and what it will mean for them, what it means for their shareholders, what it means for their economy of scale, what it means for their workers. So with the VRET, we've actually got that jobs that we all need and want. So it will also bring economic activity up to about $5.8 billion in Victoria by 2030 and create 24,000 jobs. The government is also committed to developing 6 renewable energy zones, regions identified as having the highest potential for renewable energy. This will unlock renewable energy investment supporting regional economic growth and jobs. And this is incredibly important in those areas like Gippsland, where they are transitioning, where there is a change in the way that their economy works. We are creating opportunities for that new economy, that new green economy, to create those jobs that we need in our regional cities. But it's an important question that we address here too with today's question of what can I do? So of course, there are always changes individuals can make. And as someone, I believe very strongly in the role of government, as I know Kate does. So it is an important partnership that we have as government to work with people to help the big picture stuff like the big battery, but also help people make changes in their day-to-day lives. So the 2021 Victorian budget delivered the largest household energy package of any state government ever, with a $797 million investment. This includes measures to help 250,000 low-income households replace old wood, electric and gas-fired heaters with new energy-efficient reverse cycle air conditioner systems. Now, it might sound like a small thing, but it's a big thing. 250,000 households creating, I think everyone, many of us will remember that fantastic ad that we had in the 90s of the black bubbles that came out of our household appliances. It was a terrific ad that really helped you understand how the energy that you use is creating emissions. Those 250,000 heaters turned off means something. It matters. It not only makes life easier and cheaper for people on low incomes, it means that the emissions coming from their home is significantly reduced. We're upgrading the energy efficiency of 35,000 social housing properties and setting standards for energy efficiency in rental properties. And we're expanding the successful Victorian Energy Upgrades Program. So through these programs, we'll be reducing emissions by 22 million tonnes over 10 years, the equivalent of taking 6.8 million cars off the roads. We've created the Victorian Energy Compare website, helping Victorians get better energy. 70% of households save money by using the website. The typical annual savings of around $330 a year. And we are embracing solar at record levels, with as many as 1 in 5 homes now having solar panels on their roofs. Solar batteries are growing in popularity, with more than 15,000 households having a solar battery installed, allowing them to save up to $640 on average per year on top of their existing solar panel savings. 1,900 Victorian households have now applied for the solar rebates. Battery rebates available over the next 3 years. We've extended it to keep up with demand over the next 3 years. The $3 million Neighbourhood Battery Initiative aims to support the delivery of neighbourhood-scale battery trial projects in Victoria. It will support projects across a range of neighbourhood-scale battery ownership and operational models, including those trialling customer batteries, access services, and innovative local energy trading models. So I've mentioned already the big battery in Moorabool. This battery will help secure the state's energy supply, back to what Kate was talking to around those inconsistencies of supply that we have over summer. So it will reduce wholesale energy prices and support the deployment of renewable energy while creating over 85 jobs. And it will help the power, as Kate was saying, go backwards and forwards. It acts like a bit of a transmitter. The battery is the largest in the Southern Hemisphere and is one of the largest in the world, delivering more than $2 of benefit for every dollar of Victorian taxpayer money spent. In 2018, Euroa has launched their microgrid project, thanks to funding from the Victorian Government. The project adds to increased power reliability by creating a microgrid system, rooftop solar battery systems and smart metering. Yakandanda has also received funding towards a plan to be totally renewable by 2022. In 2019, the Victorian Government funded 10 public buildings to switch to solar, adding a combined 74 kilowatts of solar to the town's renewable capacity. Along with renewable energy options, investing in recycling is also vital. We've invested $515 million through our Recycling Victoria policy to transform our recycling sector and drive investment in world-class infrastructure and technology while cutting emissions from our landfills and throughout the economy. What we are seeing now is bike paths and roads being made from recycled material, railway sleepers being used from recycled material. We are starting to see that circular economy that we so desperately need happen in this state. By 2030, Recycling Victoria will divert 80% of waste from landfill, cut total waste generation by 15%, reduce organic material going to landfill by half, and ensure every Victorian household can access food and garden organic waste recycling services through local composting. Now, I've got a shopping list of things that I could keep talking about, but I reckon I've probably spoken for long enough. So I really thank you for your patience and for your attention. And I look forward to the questions that will be coming my way. But there is a lot that is going on in the state that we as Victorians should be really proud of. And it is about creating jobs, and it is about helping our community to transition to something that is new, but also really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us. That was such a lot to cover, and I'm sure it's provoked many questions for you. If you have your questions there, our friends are wandering around with their little containers. Can you pop them in? That would be wonderful. At the back there. Lovely. Can I remind everyone that when we have questions, there will be an opportunity. I will have some questions first to ask each of the politicians, and then we'll go to the questions from the floor. We now have our local councillor, Councillor Ben Ramacharan. Ben was elected to council of the Sugarloaf Ward at the Nillumbik Council in 2020. So newish, but you've got your feet under the desk. He also works part-time as a web developer at Origin Youth Mental Health. He wants his professional life to make a meaningful difference in people's life. As I mentioned before, Ben is also representing the Green State, so it's good to hear from a different party. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Councillor Ben Ramacharan. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to first introduce Councillor Frances Eyre, who's videoing in today. She is very sorry to have missed today. She's got family commitments, but I believe if we just jump to the next slide, then we'll be able to see a video of her. And then she's going to talk about what we are doing at the moment. And then when she's finished, I'll come up and have a talk about what we can do
I'm
in the
Councillor
future.
Frances Eyre, Deputy Mayor and also Ward Councillor for Thwaites Gully. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. And I'm sorry I can't be here in person, but sometimes family trumps all. Nillumbik Shire Council is committed to working with you, our community, to help address the pressing issue of climate change. And events such as these are a really important part of this. We know you are keen for action, and there are a number of ways we, Council, are working towards achieving these results. So we're developing a climate action plan for the Shire. of which many of you will have given feedback. This will outline what we will do to reduce our climate footprint, build resilience and adapt to changes in climate, while working with and supporting the rural community to do the same. In December, we asked the community to share their thoughts on climate change and what action we should take. Almost 800 people completed the survey and 93% said climate change is an important issue, which is wonderful. 88% said council operations should be net zero emission by 2030 or sooner. And 87% said the Nillumbik community should be net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. The survey also showed that the top 5 actions the community believe council should be working on are planning for the increasing risk of fire, planning for the increasing health impacts of climate change, planning and advocating for sustainable transport, planning for the effect of climate change on local animals and plants, and buying sustainable products and services. So they were the top 5 that came out of the survey. So thank you to everyone who took the time to complete the survey. The results are currently being used to help us develop the draft climate action plan, which will be released for further feedback from you. And if you'd like to stay informed about the progress of this plan, please go to our Participate Nillumbik website. In other areas, we're taking significant climate action by building a solar farm at the former Plenty landfill site, which will produce enough green power for council's buildings. We've installed solar panels at our civic centre and operations centre. Our innovative hybrid solar and battery project at the Community Bank Stadium in Diamond Creek is the first of its kind and won a National Climate Award in October last year from the Cities Power Partnership, which is amazing. We have other major solar and battery installations underway at Eltham Leisure Centre and the Diamond Valley Sports and Fitness Centre. These solar projects include electric vehicle charging stations, and we are developing our fleet of electric and hybrid vehicles. And we are working on replacing our current high energy using streetlights with LED, and this will help us significantly cut back on one of our biggest energy users. The key to addressing climate change at a local level is, of course, working with our community. With this in mind, there are many initiatives we are undertaking. These include helping residents to be energy and water efficient, reduce waste and recycle more. We've partnered with the Australian Energy Foundation to provide residents with free expert advice on how to reduce energy consumption and avoid hefty bills. We fund Clean Energy Nillumbik to deliver practically green events for the community, including our Sustainable House Day, Speed Day to Sustainability Expert, and an energy efficient bulk buy program. As part of our Home Harvest Festival, we partnered with Banyule Council, Local Food Connect, and our libraries to install a network of seed libraries. This is to encourage residents to grow and share their homegrown produce. Edendale Farm also run a number of sustainability programs, workshops and webinars, and education is key. And one of the things they do well is engaging with our schools. Our Gardens for Wildlife program assists residents to create habitat gardens in their own backyard. We also support many local land care friends and sustainability groups, all of which would appreciate more volunteers to do their amazing work. You can find out more about our programs at our website or by subscribing to our monthly environment newsletter. Everything we do, no matter how small, can make a real difference. And the important thing being that it must be a collective effort. We all need to work together on this. I look forward to working with you all on ways we can take action and tackle climate change. Thank you.
So that was Councillor Frances Eyre. She did ask me to apologise again on her behalf for not being able to make it today. Before I start, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded and is as important to them today as it ever has been in the past. So Fran's taken up 5 minutes at the time. That leaves me with 10. I've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to talk about what we can do and what the future may hold if we can develop a really strong climate action plan as a council. So I might have to rush through a little bit. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, then please ask me questions about it afterwards and I'll be able to explain in more detail. I'll start off with the topic of a climate emergency because it's a question that gets asked a lot. Are we going to declare a climate emergency as a council? My view on a climate emergency declaration is it's a really important foundation for a strong plan, but if you do it on its own, it can actually be counterproductive. We've seen a lot of councils that declare a climate emergency and say, good job, everyone, we did it, wash our hands, and nothing actually gets done. It can't be empty words. It has to be backed up by strong action. So I think there is a feeling that we hopefully will declare a climate emergency. I think most councillors seem to be in favour of that. But if we do it, we will do it as part of our climate change action plan. So it will be embedded within the plan itself and it will form the foundation for that plan. It is more than just words. It's a way of embedding urgent climate action across all council activity, which is something you don't get if you don't use that emergency language. So that's the strength of a climate emergency. And it also helps us to advocate to the other levels of government, so state and federal government and other local councils as well. In terms of climate targets, this is something we're still nutting out as a council. There's been a lot of talk about carbon accounting methods. So how do you actually know what your emissions are? And do you use offsets or do you not use offsets? How do you calculate emissions from council? How do you calculate emissions from the community? And how feasible is it to reach net zero by 2025 or 2030 or 2040? So my hope is we will be able to set climate targets for zero by 2025 for council activities and zero by 2030 for the community. But that all depends on feasibility and what sort of carbon accounting methods we use. And I think the feeling among councillors and staff at the moment is we're going to aim high, but we're also going to aim realistic. So that's where we're going with our targets at the moment. But whatever plan we come up with, we need to be able to sell that to the community. I think one of the questions we're going to be asked at the end talks about the issues with the press and the way the press portrays climate change. And it's a really sad thing. Kate touched on it in her speech about how climate change has been turned into this political weapon. It's not about the important issue of actually saving our world from catastrophe. It's about scoring political points. So there is a lot of misinformation out there. People who say it's not real, and action on climate change is increasing your electricity bill, or people who say it's not that severe. People are blowing it out of proportion, and we need to be able to educate our community. So that's going to involve fact sheets and information campaigns. We've got fantastic community organisations. I mean, just look at what St Margaret's Church is doing today to help inform people. We've got Clean Energy Nillumbik, so they do the Practically Green event every year. They do Speed Date, the Sustainability Experts, Sustainable House Day, all ways of communicating with our community about what climate change is, why it's important, and how we can actually make change. So we can work with community groups like that to help spread the message. But at the end of the day, we can't convince everyone. There will always be people who don't care about climate change, who don't want to see climate action. And I think the messaging we have to use with them is we're creating renewable energy to save you money. Because for a lot of people, it comes back to your hip pocket. And the beautiful thing about renewable energy is you actually can save money. You can do it effectively for free if you do it right. And you can even make money from it. So that's the message I think we're going to have to push out to the people who don't care about climate change. We can actually save you money with this as well. So in terms of actions that I hope will come out of the Climate Action Plan, and this is all, none of this is decided yet. This is all stuff that we're going to be pushing for to make part of the plan, but we've got a whole load of processes that will determine how feasible it all is. So these are the hopes, and let's cross our fingers, but it won't be the plan itself. So look, the simple business side of things, what do we do as a council? Well, I think an obvious one coming out of COVID is allowing staff to continue working from home if that's what they want to do. Give them the facilities they need to be able to work from home, to reduce their mileage, to reduce travel, reduce emissions from cars. When council's buying stuff, so we can look at our procurement policies, ask, do we really need it? Do we really need to buy all this stuff? Is it from a sustainable source? When we go out to tender and we ask people to tender for a contract, we can put criteria against that. So they have to meet certain climate criteria and other environmental criteria. And when we choose our preferred tenderer, we can actually go back and tell the unsuccessful applicants why they were unsuccessful as a way of helping them to improve the way they run their business. And the other thing we can do is we can publish publicly the environmental credentials of the successful applicants as a way of applauding the things that they're doing. We can look at our investment portfolios. Council has a lot of money that we invest, including in superannuation. So look at where that money is invested and make sure that we're investing responsibly. And also look at where we're getting our loans from. When council takes out a loan, make sure that we're taking it out from a loan source that gives environmentally responsible loans. And also looking at our grants policy. When we're giving grants to the community, are we supporting sustainable activities? Are we supporting groups that are treating the environment well? So that's just the business side of things. Looking at our infrastructure and our assets, we can reassess the materials that are used for council infrastructure. Make sure that we have solar panels on all council facilities. When Frances spoke before, she spoke about the council facilities that do have solar panels, and that's really good progress. But we need to rapidly put solar panels on all of the other facilities. There are barriers. Some of the roofs aren't strong enough, which we've recently found out. But it makes economic sense to strengthen those roofs and put the panels on, because we will save money on electricity bills and we will earn that money back very quickly. Looking at the council fleet cars, we've recently installed an electric car charger at the council offices, finally. So now we can actually start buying electric vehicles. And the brilliant thing about buying electric vehicles as a council is we only keep cars for 4 years. So in 4 years' time, those vehicles will have reached the end of their life with council, and we then sell them, and that's cheap electric vehicles that are available for our community. So it's a really good way of making that transition to electric happen. And we need to look at more than just our cars. Council has a whole load of vehicles, trucks, and all other things, which we can also look to electrify. We can look at the gas cookers that are in council buildings and trying to replace them with electric cookers. So there are a whole load of ways that council can reduce our emissions, as well as the Plenty solar farm that Frances mentioned at the start. In terms of reducing community emissions, one thing we learned from the survey that we ran recently was some of the barriers that stop people from making the change to renewables. And they're really easy barriers for council to overcome. People told us it's too expensive, too much paperwork, I'm too busy, I just can't do it. So we need to make it easy. That's what we've learned. We need to do the paperwork for you. We need to manage the money for you. We need to have the engineers who can do that work to tell you what sort of battery you need and what sort of inverter you need. So we can just put the solar panels on your house and you can pay us back for it through a special rate scheme. That's how we make it easy. Environment Victoria already offer environmental upgrade finance for business. So what that means is businesses can apply through the local council to get upgrades such as replacing their cooker, better insulation, solar panels, etc. And they then pay that back over time through the savings on their power bills. That's not available for residential properties. So as a council, we're looking at ways that we can finance that for residents. So what that'll likely involve is bulk buying stuff like solar panels and window sealing and reverse cycle heaters, reverse cycle air conditioners, gas-free heaters. And then doing a special charge scheme, which basically means we add a little bit of extra money to your rates bill each year, and that's how you pay us back over time for installing those things on your house. So that way residents don't have to pay the full cost up front, but they pay it back slowly over time, and council can facilitate the full process of upgrading your homes to make them more climate friendly and to save you money on your power bills. We can also look into a virtual power plant, which I think Vicki mentioned before, and whether we can create virtual power plants for the community. And another thing we can look at is creating community solar farms. Not so much here in Eltham, but in the rural areas of the Shire, we have some plots of land that are quite small, too small to be developed on. So you can't build a house there. And one thing we can look towards is whether we can purchase those lots of land off the owners who currently don't have a use for them, and use them for small scale solar farms, which can be connected to nearby homes to provide them with cheap, clean electricity. We need to make electric car chargers available. And I think there are already programs that are doing that. And we've already got one in Diamond Creek, some more going in Eltham, I believe, shortly. And the other thing we can do is look at bus routes and putting electric car chargers along bus routes, because the state government have a plan to move us to electric buses. And the sooner we can have electric chargers on bus routes, the sooner they can actually make that change. We can put controls on development, so requiring new homes to have solar panels on them when they're built, requiring them to have proper insulation and window sealing. And that's some work that the state government's doing at the moment through a project called Environmentally Sustainable Design. And that's something council will be able to work with the state government on down the track. So that's just about reducing our emissions. But the other thing we have to do is we have to remove the carbon from the atmosphere, because the damage is done and we're going to see temperatures increasing. We can't just stop emitting, we also have to go carbon negative. So that's the next step. So in terms of sequestering carbon from our atmosphere, we can start simple, tree planting. We can do it in the urban areas, we can do it in the rural areas. I was out with council staff just yesterday talking about where we can put more trees in throughout Eltham. And I'm also looking into ways we can do tree planting in the rural areas as well. We can improve soil health. Soil gets forgotten, but it's actually an incredibly important tool to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. If you have healthy soil, it saps carbon from the atmosphere, and it's better at growing produce, especially in agricultural land. There's this stuff called biochar. So you take organic waste and you cook it at a high temperature in a vacuum, and then you can put that into the soil to improve the soil health and increase the carbon that's in the soil. And we are about to start trialling our own biochar machine at the Waste and Recovery Centre in Plenty. So that's really exciting. And we really do need to focus on sequestration, because once we get to that carbon zero, we then have to go down to carbon negative after that. So that's all about climate change mitigation. And I've given you a big list there of things that I really hope we can do. We probably won't get to all of them over the next 4 years, but that's what I'm going to be putting on the agenda. But the other side of it, which I think gets forgotten about sometimes, is not just stopping climate change, but actually adapting to it, because we've already seen temperatures rise. We're already seeing more severe weather events and storms and bushfires, and that's just going to get worse. Even if we stopped emitting today, even if we went carbon negative today, it would still get worse for at least the next decade, while the emissions we've created so far begin to take effect. So we need to find out how we can adapt. So Francis was talking about seed libraries, which we've been creating throughout the community. And I hope that throughout the next 4 years, we can create a food system strategy, which will look at how produce is grown locally, how we can reduce food miles, encourage people to eat healthily, and make sure that we have food security. So if agricultural land in other areas starts to struggle under climate change, we can still produce our own food locally and make sure that our residents are able to eat. We need to prepare residents for increased storms and fires and floods. And I think the other thing we need to look at is insurance, because whether we like it or not, our insurance bills are going to rise. Council is spending an extra $150,000 on insurance next year. And that's partially because of climate change, and residents can expect similar increases. So how do we help residents cope with that and manage their insurance so they can get the best deal? I could talk for much longer, but I've probably already exceeded my time. So I will finish there and yeah, look forward to taking everybody's questions.
Thank you, Ben, for that. As you have your question there for Ben, it has been put to me, why would a church put something like this on? Why would we do that? Well, as a person of faith, we are called to care for the place where we live, locally, statewide, nationally, and across the world. This is not an issue just for the politicians. Sorry, guys, you don't get this by yourself. But we do this together. We partner with. So that's why we are grateful that you have come today. And, thank you for all of you. I don't want to give each of you an easy ride, though. I want to be friendly, and I want to invite you up here for some questions because I felt very alone. So come and join me up here. And we are going to ask you some questions. Friends, there's an opportunity as we go through the questions that you ask, and I think if there's time, there'll be opportunity to ask your questions. One thing I do want to say is I don't want to let you guys off easy. You represent us. You work for us, whether in opposition, in government, or in local council. Thank you for that, but we want to keep you accountable. Now, we do that, but we do that respectfully because as I said, we want to work with you. So I have some questions. Do you mind if I ask? All right. We've got one mic because the other one died, so I'll just hand this across. You did break it.
Oh, look, it's back.
Oh, John, thank you. Lovely. How is your level of government educating the community on the need for action and climate change? You have the mic. So you start.
So, well, look, I will start by saying, unfortunately, yeah. So it is really hard because our ability to use the levers of government to educate, to use the platform that government gives you are just not there. From an opposition point of view, what are we trying to do? Well, like I was talking about in my speech, we're trying to push the debate in this country to a place where we get meaningful action and we get a constructive debate that reframes our future, really. The big questions about what is our economy going forward, what are the jobs of the future, and what does our planet look like going forward? So that's really where we are trying to take things. And, you know, in terms of sort of specific initiatives, it is hard to do from opposition. It's one of the reasons I want us to get this debate right, because we have to be in government to be able to do large-scale public information campaigns, to be able to do targeted information campaigns. All of that relies on the resources of government. So Vicki, you've got behind you.
From the state, well, I suppose there's many layers in which you can communicate with a community and how you can help a community stay informed or learn new things. One of the best ways to do that is through our schools. So we have a number of programs that are going through the schools, and it is something that I am sure anybody who has got children or grandchildren is aware of how well they embrace the kind of questioning, the opportunities that they've got at school, whether it is about their school gardens, whether it is about learning about climate change through science. So there are some very good things that we are funding through our schools, but it is also about, you know, coming and being at forums like this. And I thank you for that opportunity, because what you're saying before is absolutely right, but you actually are helping us do our job by being here, not just by being accountable, but also that ongoing communication about what is important, what is necessary for our community and what we need to do. It's about talking with business. It's about helping them understand what the importance of the importance of identifying and addressing climate change. It's about helping them find the tools to create their businesses or restructure their businesses so that they are responsive to climate change, so that they are, as Ben was saying, not only mitigating any of the emissions or the damage that they are creating through their work, but also what they need to do to address the realities that are in front of us. So there's a multi-layered approach that you need to go through at a government level to help people understand climate change, to not be so paralysed with fear by climate change that they can't actually engage with it and recognise what they need to do to combat it, but also empower them with ways of helping them be a part of the solution.
Ben, thank you.
Thank you. Well, they say council's the closest level of government to the community, and I think in a lot of ways that's true. So we do have that direct contact. I'd say we're not doing enough at the moment to communicate that. So hopefully that's something that can form part of the Climate Change Act plan. But currently, as I said when I was in my speech before, we are working with local community groups such as Clean Energy Nillumbik. We're providing them fund, and that's already happening. They're already running really valuable events to help keep the community informed. Down the track, I'd like to see a lot more communications coming directly from council, and I'd like to see us really pushing that out in an effective way, be it through our newsletter that we do every or through the Facebook advertising campaign, or there's a lot that we can do to just give people simple bite-sized information about what's happening, why is it important. And the other thing, which I said before, is not everybody's going to care. So that you do pay that through your rates. So, you know, 150,000 more of your rates has been wasted, well, not wasted, but gone this year on insurance. And that's money that we can't spend on other things for our community. So I think that's what we can communicate. And the other thing is, again, when we put solar panels on your house, when we build a community solar farm and connect it to your house, we're saving you money. And you might even I think that's how we can get our community on board. And I think, yeah, we do need to do a lot more work in that space, and hopefully it'll be.
So Ben, hold on to the microphone and we'll come back. How will your level of government engage with large business and get them on board with positive changes for their environment? That's the business question.
Well, I think I mentioned before about environmental upgrade finance, which is an initiative by the state government which through local councils. So what we etc., which will be down the track, and I think that council, I think we need to for facilitating, especially in some of the. Yes, we don't have a whole lot. Panels you can put on those roofs in areas where there aren't trees around the houses that shade them from the sun. So there's a huge potential there to put solar panels on those businesses, not just to give them free power, but also to provide free power to the community and other nearby homes. So yeah, I think there is definitely a lot that we can do with business at a council level.
You would think that the hot air that comes from politicians, we'd be able to charge this ourselves, but that's
so you can have the mic that works, Vicki.
As I was saying in my introductory remarks, part of that is about giving certainty to business, is how we engage with them. And that is around things like the threat that I mentioned before, which is helping businesses understand what the playing field looks like, what is expected of them, how they can plan and how they can plan ahead. It is also, as Ben was saying, supporting those businesses to transition, to help them be as economically viable as possible. But it is also, as I mentioned, about investing in our regional communities and helping those, creating new business opportunities so that those businesses who are winding down can actually transition to a new economy.
Look, I think one of the most frustrating things about where we are nationally at the moment is that we're behind where business is in most cases. So as I said, business is looking for certainty. The biggest fund manager in the world, BlackRock, recently came out and told all its investors that climate change was something they have to consider in their investment plans. the big investors around the world, the ones who manage the big pension funds, our own superannuation companies, they're looking for places to put their money that account for climate. So the potential is there for us if we, again, get our settings right, where we have the manufacturing, where we have the renewable energy being made here, for us to get that investment from business. So in many ways, I think it's business that is pushing nationally at the moment for a lot greater action. There is, of course, a recalcitrant part, that the fossil fuel industry, not all of the fossil fuel industry has seen the writing on the wall yet. And obviously, in our federal politics, they are very closely aligned with the National Party, and the National Party continues to be a voice for that industry. But again, if you look increasingly at where business more broadly is and business internationally is, they're the ones actually pushing government at the moment.
Thank you. Question for our Labor politicians. What's Labor's response to the technology roadmap and the idea that gas is a transitional fuel?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd say that what roadmap? I mean, there was just nothing in that. There was a slogan with nothing behind it. Yes, we need a roadmap. We need a genuine plan for how we transition our economy. And as I outlined in my speech, that means investment in the technologies of the future, in clean energy that we can export. It means genuine policies in those spaces. And that's not what we're getting from this government. So I'm not going to waste too much time on that. The idea of gas as a transition fuel, look, gas is still part of our electricity, of our power mix. It's not the future. We are not yet, for all those reasons I was explaining, in a position where we can switch wholly to renewables. Our grid's not up to it. Our houses aren't yet set up to it, but it's where we will be and it's where we need to be. So there's a role for gas now. There's obviously not a role for a gas-led recovery that is just about putting government money in the pockets of large businesses who happen to have a very open line to the Morrison government.
Thanks, Deb. So we do, the state government does accept that we need to transition from gas, and that gas will be a transition fuel. But Kate's right, there's around about 2 million people in Victoria who have got gas. I'm one of them. I have a gas stove, I have gas heating, I have gas water. I don't have solar because I have too many trees. But it is something that we have to do, and there is the Victorian government is working towards our own roadmap in separate from what the federal government is or isn't quite doing. I think that there's still a fair bit of work there that they've got to do. So there's a $108 million energy innovation initiative which will help bring new technologies such as offshore wind and renewable hydrogen to the Victorian market, which will help us with that transition.
I also don't have solar panels on my house for the same reason. Too many trees. Yes. Look, can I just say in terms of gas, it is not a renewable energy source. When you put your gas cooker on, it is making emissions. There are greenhouse gases coming out of that. And I think probably most of us in the room, if not all of us, have gas cookers at home. It's just the way we're set up. And one thing council can do is to help us transition away from gas cookers, help us transition away from gas heaters, and put us onto electric powered devices in our homes so we can then, power them from renewable energy.
Keep the microphone there, Ben. Question for council. What's the time frame for that? What are they really looking at? How are they, pacing that out?
Well, look, as I said before, it does, it depends what we decide to do as a council. I certainly support it. I think most councillors are probably erring on the side of supporting it. In terms of a timeline, it's going to form part of our climate change action plan. I really don't want us to do it now. I don't want us to just put up a motion to declare a climate emergency and then move on. It has to come with a strong plan. So it's something that we keep coming back to and keep acting on. So the climate change action plan is due to be completed later on this year, I believe. So hopefully at the time when we pass that climate change action plan, we will also at the same time declare a climate emergency.
Kate and Vicki, is the Labor forming workers in the fossil fuel industry that if Australia transitioned to renewable energy from fossil fuels, it would create more jobs rather than less in the fossil fuel industry? This is the claim of by the Climate Council and Beyond Zero Emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have to talk to those communities and help them understand how to transition. And that is happening. But you've also got to start to create the alternate industries that they can go into first. They've got to see some tangible place for them to go. And they've also got to understand what that work looks like and feel that it is respected and valued work. And that has to be an ongoing conversation. It isn't really the way to go about things by just turning up to people and saying, right, you're not doing that anymore, you're going to do that. We have to help bring people with us on the journey, and it is a long conversation. Change does take time, but that's certainly underway.
I would agree with everything Vicki just said. As I've been saying, this is a jobs conversation now. And the opportunity that I've been talking about in hydrogen and clean energy, a lot of those opportunities are in the areas that have been reliant on fossil fuels. So the same kind of assets that have made them areas where fossil fuels are mined or exported. So access to ports, good rail and road infrastructure. Those can be things that when we, can hopefully transform our manufacturing and our industry, also benefit in terms of hydrogen and all those types of things. But it has to be an honest conversation. And it does have to respect the fact that these are people's lives and livelihoods that we are talking about. And, I had my colleague Pat Conroy down here this week, and he's Labor's Shadow Assistant Minister on Climate Change. His electorate is just outside the Hunter. He tells me, in his Sarah Palin moment, he can look out his window and see Australia's largest coal mine, and his neighbour's a coal miner. And as he said, the people who are working in these mines, they know that their children will not be working in their mines, but they also know that these are jobs where you can exit high school and be working in a really tough industry, but you are earning about $150,000. That is a good, secure, well-paid job. And so what we've got to have is a conversation about what are the good, secure, well-paid jobs of the future, so that we take some of that fear away and we talk genuinely about what a transition looks like and what it looks like for those communities who are going to feel the effects around jobs and the economy in a way that those of us here just are not going to feel it.
They say that vision leaks. So how is your level of government educating the community on the need for real action with climate change? Really, you have to share that vision. How do you keep that vision in front of people is my question.
No, it's a good question. And I think that Kate is a really good example of leading by example. And Kate just spoke about the forum that she had last week, which she had a number of, this week, where she had I know she had a number of people come to. There's this constant dialogue that we have with our communities around this issue. And it is the responsibility of everybody in our parliaments to be doing that, of everybody at every elected level, but also doing exactly what you're doing here, which is continuing that conversation. This isn't a conversation that is going to end very soon. It's not a conversation that's going to end at the end of this year. It is going to keep going on and on and on as we continue to refine what it is to be, what change means, what it is that we need to do. And as new technologies become available to us, we understand them better and they become more affordable, which is exactly what we are seeing. That change will continue. So we all have to keep talking about it. And I think that there is a responsibility, which clearly St Margaret's is embracing, of the community to also really drive that conversation as well, wherever they can and however they can. And we've seen this with conversations that we've had, and I know that St Margaret's has been a part of this as well, around refugees, where we know that the more we talk about refugees, we know the more that we tell their stories, that we help people understand the humans behind the arrivals of why people have wanted to come here and what they've wanted to do. The people's minds open to that. And it is through the community having those conversations that makes that mind opening so much easier. So I do want to thank St Margaret's for the leadership you're showing in climate change conversation, in helping people be informed, in seeking answers, but also helping to disseminate that information into the community as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that, if you haven't had the chance to read a book by Rebecca Huntley called How to Talk About Climate Change in a Way That Actually Matters, highly recommend it. She's a demographer, is that the word I'm looking for? And did research really on what cuts through to people on climate change and how do you actually frame the discussion we're all trying to have in a way that shifts opinion. And, you know, the conclusions you came to was actually that a lot of what shifts opinion is not people like me or Vicki or Ben. It is it is the personal and the local connections that are really important. So again, as Vicki said, that's what makes what you're doing here today and the work that you're doing more broadly so important, because it is those everyday conversations and those sort of everyday changes that actually in a lot of cases are making the shifts we need.
Well, look, I think I spoke before in a similar question about, I guess, what we're doing to communicate it to the community. But look, just touching on some of the messages that, you know, that we can share, you know, ranging from the really dire stuff like, you know, the potential for food systems to collapse, which is a genuine potential if we don't take action. The rising sea levels, more storms and floods and bushfire. And I think that's something that really hits home here in Nillumbik. We saw the shocking fires. You can believe it was over a year ago now, January 2020. Shocking bushfires across Australia, at least partially driven by climate change. And that is just going to get worse and worse. And we've seen Black Saturday right in our backyard here in Nillumbik, which was a dark time for a lot of us. And that's going to become more common. Think about, you know, for those of you who like skiing, by 2050, you won't be able to do that anymore. Not here anyway. More hot days. You know, who likes having 40-degree days during summer? Because there are going to be a lot more of them. For Queenslanders. It's going to be drier. We could see our creeks dry up, which is going to be harmful to wildlife, harmful to ecosystems locally. You're going to see more power cuts from storms, more damage to buildings. And while we'll have, you know, it'll be much drier all year round, we'll have more severe weather events and flooding. And I don't know how many people here live in Warrandyte or North Warrandyte. I do. And in January last year, we were annihilated by hail. It was one of the most severe hailstorms we've had. Destroyed houses, cars, windows. We found wildlife afterwards that looked like it had bullet holes through it from these huge hailstones. So communicating that with people and getting that message across about the impacts this is actually going to have going forward, and the fact that this is just going to get much worse. I think that's how we communicate the need for real action.
I just don't believe you is a reaction that I know you get. It's not my reaction, people, but there are people out there who just say no. It's not real. All the things you spoke about, Ben, you're just scaremongering. So my question is, how do you neutralise opposition to action on climate change, especially within the press and the media, and how are your policies and progresses impeded or assisted by the media? It's a question about the media.
That's one option. Brings me back a few years ago, long before I got onto council. I actually went up to the Adani mine in Queensland, and I was there when a person chained herself to a drill rig. And of course, Adani had employees there, contractors who were, you know, contracted to work on the Adani mine, who were very upset, especially not so much the employees, but the contractors who then didn't get paid because this person had chained themselves to the drill rig, and contractors weren't allowed to do that, weren't able to do their work, and simply weren't getting paid by Adani. We gave them chocolate. And we actually had a really good conversation with them. And by the end of it, I think the quote we got from them was, "You climate weirdos aren't that bad." So I think it's about bringing people along on the journey. We've got to get over that frustration and being angry with people. And if people don't understand it, explain it in simple terms and bring them along for that journey. You're not going to get everyone. There are always going to be people who will simply believe that right-wing media, you know,
The earth is flat.
the earth is flat. But, you know, I keep coming back to this. It's about money. It's all about money for some people. They can read the most right-wing newspapers and be completely convinced that climate change isn't real. But if you're going to save them money by putting solar panels on their homes, they'll be on board.
Yeah, no, Ben is absolutely right. One of the ways that you do work through that is you go on regardless, and it is by, you may not accept the science of climate change, but you do want to save that hip pocket, have that hip pocket savings. So you will put on the solar panels, which means despite yourself, you're reducing emissions. But it goes back to what I was saying before around, and what Kate was saying around, communities trust the information that communities have in themselves. So the more that people in our community are talking about the change that they are making, are talking in a positive way about the things that they are doing, they will see more people become interested in what they're doing. We know that by arguing with somebody and giving them the facts, it doesn't change their mind. It actually entrenches their view and makes them even more resistant to opening their mind. But if you can talk to them about things like, here is how you can save on your energy bills. Here is what this, and I think Rotary actually in Eltham have gone about this well, Rotary International have gone about this in a good way. So there's been an additional pillar added to Rotary's platform, which is around the environment. So instead of bogging their Rotaries down, who I'm sure people will have many different views in their clubs, they've accepted that they actually want to improve the environment, and they're creating a number of programs in local communities around, which will in fact be addressing climate change, but that's not what they're calling it. So you bring everybody with you for the same purpose, being honest about what it is that you're trying to achieve, which is a cleaner community. But there's different ways to go about it and different ways to engage with it. I think we also need to not be too afraid of the fact that we do have some of our media outlets who are very negative about climate change, or who really don't want to report the full stories that are going on about climate change. You might be relieved to learn that not many people actually read them. So it seems to make a lot of noise and it generates a bit, but there's a bit of a bubble, a bit of that noise vacuum going on there where they're essentially talking to themselves.
Yeah, we have two former Prime Ministers at the moment, Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd, who are both being very vocal about the positioning of News Limited, particularly on climate change. And it is difficult. It is, you know, we are in a country where our media is mainly dominated by News Limited, and it is a difficult environment to have a genuine climate conversation through the media on. I would echo what Vicki says, which is that really, yeah, as we've been saying, a lot of where people's views get entrenched on these issues is not from the newspaper, it is from people they know. So that can be even tougher in a way to counter, right? So, you know, reaching mass media, we all as politicians have techniques for that. Sometimes countering something one-on-one or through a social media group, that's actually harder to hold on to and to reach people through. But it does also offer that opportunity, you know, again, particularly for groups like this and other groups in our community, and for groups that we, you know, previously wouldn't have put in this debate, but agricultural groups, farmers groups, these are the people who are actually having conversations about what climate change looks like right now and what change looks like. So I do think that increasingly the sort of Rupert Murdoch News Limited view of the world, as I said, is becoming isolated globally. It is not as influential perhaps as we think in shifting debate in this country. Where it is, I think, damaging is scare campaigns. It does amplify scare campaigns. And again, you know, one of the things I was saying to you and that I'm acutely conscious of at a federal level, if we want to do any of this, we have to get elected. And so we have to be able to do that without setting ourselves up as a target for a big scare campaign. And, you know, again, in sitting in this audience, I can probably say as well, that probably means we won't say all the things you want to hear from us in the next election campaign, because part of what we need to make sure we do is that we win right across this country so that we can get in and get some action, and that we don't make ourselves a target. That just means this government can put out lies and scare people into not voting for us.
Thank you. I'm aware of the time. Karen, do we have some questions ready to go? It's 5 to 4, and I'm aware that you have been working hard today, so thank you for your time. Okay. How much time do we have, Karen? Half an hour. I have 5 questions. If we race through them, I have 2 more. Why is Victorian Labor at cross purposes with its federal counterpart in introducing extra taxes on electric vehicles, thereby maxing Victoria in the worst taxing, sorry, can't read that, jurisdiction?
It's a good question, and I wouldn't say that we are at loggerheads or that we are different, because there is agreement with state Labor that the cost of cars when you purchase them, so the import taxes that go onto these cars, is too high, and that does need to be addressed and that does need to be reduced. I understand people's concern around the charges that we propose to put onto electric vehicles when they hit the road, but I think it's about working through the economies of scale and working through at what point do you make that trigger as to when road users pay for the use of those roads, that those maintenance, that those electric charging stations and others actually do get put in. Now, people will be aware that when we started to roll out petrol cars, it was the petrol companies that put the Bowsers everywhere, that petrol stations popped up. It's government as well as private industry that has to put these out now, but it really has to be a government investment. But there's also lost revenue. So while there's around 1% of EVs at the moment on our roads, as those grow, we also lose revenue from those taxes not being paid. So at what point do you want the trigger to come in? Is it 10% of EVs? Is it 20% of EVs? Is it 50% of EVs? At what point does that come in? And in the gap, where does that lost money come from? Where does the money come from to pay for that road upgrade, that road infrastructure? Where does it come to put in those electricity points that we want put all across our state so that people will travel and will use their EVs more? So the real battle here in the first instance is to get the cost of the cars down. And this tax isn't here at the moment, but we still only have 1% of people buying EVs. It is because those cars are too expensive. That is why we don't have more EVs on the road.
No, you've done a great job there.
Deforestation. Hold that. Deforestation is 15% of all carbon emissions. Why doesn't Victoria stop cutting its native forests? And Australia has the highest destruction of forests in all developed nations. Vicki, that's for you. Did you?
Yes, I do. So we are ending logging in our native forests. So big forests harvest about 2,500 to 3,000 hectares a year, which is about 0.4% of the entire public native forests in Victoria. So that's the equivalent of about 4 trees in every 10,000. About 94% of Victorian native forests are in protected areas and cannot be harvested because that is unsuitable. So it is with old growth, harvesting of old growth forests was ceased immediately on the announcement of the Victorian Forestry Plan in November 2019. At the time the plan was announced, Victoria had about 420,000 hectares of old growth forest, about 320,000 hectares was already protected in parks and reserves, and about 90,000 hectares was available for timber harvesting in state forests. So these figures are based on modelled old growth. The old growth forest that occurs outside our parks and reserves occurs mostly in small fragmented stands that can't be easily incorporated into our parks and reserves. And for this reason, while native timber harvesting is being phased out, the boundaries of old growth forest stands are marked in the field and timber harvesting operators are excluded from working within those boundaries. So it's rolling out. We're ending the old growth forests and the rest is being phased out. But we also do have to have a proper conversation about what we want to do with our wood and where we want to source our wood from. If we do want wooden floors, if we do want wooden furniture, where do we want it from, and do we want it to be sustainably harvested, or do we want to import it from overseas where we can't control where it has been sourced from and how it has been milled and who has milled it? So in this state, we do have wood that is being harvested. We do have people who are being paid properly to harvest that wood, and we are doing it as sustainably as possible. So there is a conversation and there is a need to reduce that forestry work, but we still need to also have a realistic understanding of where we want our wood products to come from, what we want them that to look like.
Ben.
This isn't something council can do a whole lot on. It's not in our council area, but forests are an issue that's very dear to my heart. The forests that have been logged are just up the hill from us in Toolangi and even parts of Kinglake. So they are right in our backyard. I don't know how many people here have been to the logging coops, but it is heartbreaking to see the destruction. It's not harvesting. Harvesting is when you grow something over the course of the year and then take it out and then grow it back over the next year. Those trees won't grow back for hundreds of years. And while I think it's good that the state government has begun that move to ending logging in Victoria, that's 10 years away, and we need to do it now. We don't have 10 years left of timber at the current rate of logging. So that's definitely something I'd like to see change. I think that the state government's doing such a fantastic job on so many fronts as far as climate change goes, and Vicki spoke about some really good initiatives before, but logging is I think the most disappointing one, and the one that I'd like to see the most change on in the coming years.
Ben, keep the microphone. Over the past 20 years, Eltham's natural habitat has been increasingly eroded by ever-increasing development. What will Nillumbik Council do to address this issue? Will this be part of the Climate Action Plan? And what can we do to ensure the protection and preservation of our unique environment?
I work in tech support, and off and on again always seems to work. So our Environment and Sustainability Advisory Committee is looking into preserving the tree canopy at the moment. So that's something that will take a couple of years, I think, of research and stuff that is far. So one thing I've learned in the last 6 months since I got onto local council is everything is excruciatingly slow. And unfortunately, there is a procedure we have to follow when we amend the planning scheme. And if you want to do it today, well, you'll be waiting at least 6 months to change the planning scheme. But we will do it, and we're working towards it. And what we're going to do is we're going to introduce an amendment which will look at requiring a certain amount of tree planting for any development and a certain number of trees in different properties throughout Eltham. There are other things that we can do outside the planning scheme, maybe in the shorter term, which is about tree planting. We've got a project coming up, which is going out for community consultation soon, where we'll be looking at road congestion throughout Eltham. And as part of that, we'll be building shoulders on some of the roads in Eltham and putting trees there. There will be, I think there is only one spot that I've been shown where a tree will come out, but right next to that, we'll be putting 2 or 3 trees in. And these are urban trees. So what I've learned about urban trees in the last 6 months is one urban tree costs $25,000, but that comes along with a guarantee and a warranty. So it does reach maturity. It's different to the more rural areas where you can just plant a load of trees and some of them will reach maturity. in the urban areas, you can only plant 1 or 2. So they have to come with a warranty, and then you make sure that they reach that maturity. But that is something we're working on. I think, yeah, I would agree with everyone that it's an excruciatingly slow process, but we've got 5 new councillors. We're all still getting our feet under the table, and we're working on the work of the last council, which is maybe not so up to scratch. So it will take time, but I promise we are working towards it.
Thank you. This is for you, Kate. What most motivates federal pollies to take climate action, and how do we as citizens supercharge that?
So I think I've said to you all, I am motivated by the need to take climate action. And if I look at the group of Labor politicians that I came into the parliament with in 2019, I think nearly all of us in our first speeches to the parliament named climate change as one of the motivating factors why we're there. So I'm going to say that I think on our side of politics, we get it. It's actually the reason a lot of us are there. What we're struggling with is how do we get the rest of the community there, and how do we, get the policies in that we need. How do you shift someone like Matt Canavan or Barnaby Joyce? I don't know, to be honest. However, I think increasingly, as I've been discussing, they will be left behind, and increasingly their communities will see that they're not on their side. And that's really, again, where, the politics of fear around this has come in, that people like Barnaby and Matt go into their communities and they spread fear and they say, I'm here for you, those guys just want to take your jobs away. So very much so, the discussion we need to have is they're not on your side. They're actually not looking out for your future. And the jobs of the future are in clean energy. And as I said, that's a discussion that we're having as a Labor Party federally. For the community, that's absolutely a discussion to have at a community level as well. Again, all of us, I think, can do our part to try and reduce some of that divide, that sense that, really got heightened, I think, at the last federal election, that, people in Victoria didn't get what was going on in Queensland and didn't get what the jobs are. There's a role for all of us in trying to reach out across that divide and say, hey, we don't want to take your jobs. We need to make this work for everyone.
This is for everyone. How do you respond to my concern that electric vehicles will only contribute to the problem while they are using electricity produced from brown coal production? That is until the last coal-fixed power station closes.
Yeah, it's a really good point. This is a change we've got to have and will have in a number of areas. And again, going to the argument I've been outlining around where our economy is going, the power companies have made it very clear that those brown coal stations are not the producers of our future. And Vicki will know this in more depth than I do in Victoria's case, but they are getting out of those power plants. They've said to the market that these actually are not the cost sustainable ways of producing power in the future, both building new coal-fired power plants, but also just running existing ones. So, that mix will shift. We will get more renewables into the grid. As I said, though, that takes, action at a federal level as well. And it does take some work around the grid, around giving investors a target so that they know where to put their money. So I think that equation around what you're putting into your car to make it go will change.
It's a good question, and Kate's right. Coal as an energy source is a dying technology. It's an old technology. It's an out-of-date technology. And it is that transition that we're currently in. But it is also, as we were saying before, working with those businesses. So we're seeing, as you're saying with Diamond Creek, and it's going to come into Eltham, the charging stations. We've got some at Greensboro Plaza. We've got, what's his name? What's his company called? Thank you, Tesla. Sorry, fell out of my head. We've got Tesla charging at Doncaster. The more that it gets rolled out, the more where they will be on buildings that are powered by solar or have access to solar power. And I think that that is a part of how we get more vehicles on the roads that are powered by green energy, is by those households, getting more households with solar panels, which is what we're currently doing, so that at night time when you plug your car in, that's where it's getting its source from. So it's just continuing that rollout of renewable energies across the whole state, so that wherever we go, wherever we charge, we're using green energy.
I think it's a really important question to ask, because we can move everybody to electric cars and electric cookers and electric heaters and pretend we've done a good thing. When it takes both sides of the coin, you can't just move everybody to electric and you solve the problem. We also need to move our electricity to renewable sources. But the point is, we can't power petrol cars renewably. So while we're making that transition to renewable energy, which I hope we'll do quickly, we also have to move the cars to electric, because once we reach 100% renewables, if we've still got people on petrol cars, well, then we haven't solved that side of the problem. So it's about creating the infrastructure that's needed. But one thing I will note is that the electric car charger that we currently have in Diamond Creek is off the grid and powered by the solar panels on the roof of the Diamond Creek Leisure Centre. So just remember that. And I think I know at least one person in this room who has an electric car, which she charges from the solar panels on her roof. So that is done. And I think, yeah, the point with electric cars is once you have an electric car, it is then easier to transition that car to renewables than if you keep the petrol car.
Vicki, I'm glad you have the microphone. Agriculture and food systems contribute hugely to emissions. What is the government doing about this? And turn it, push it up, yeah.
I have a veggie garden. I have chooks. It is about sustainability, and it's about engaging with our agricultural sector, and it is about helping them invest in new ways of producing agriculture, of doing it in sustainable ways, of looking at new technologies around the food production. But it is also around how we help them move food around. How do we reduce the miles that they use, or at least help those miles be green when they're using them? So there is a number of things that the state government is doing. We're replenishing fish we've just been replenishing fish in lakes in Colac. It's around helping sustainable fishing. It is all of the work that we have done to protect our waterways around the state, from around the coastline, to help ensure that there isn't overfishing. There is around helping people invest and understand organic farming, how to reduce our reliance on pesticides. But it really is about investing in sustained technologies that help farming, that help agriculture development be cheaper and easier and greener.
Thank you. Kate, at a federal level of governance, are you aware of the grand solar minimum approaching and the climate crisis involvement of this celestial process? And are there initiatives to address solar flares and extreme weather events that are imminent?
No, I will have to take that one on notice.
Will you get back to the person?
Yes, happy to.
Wonderful,
Yep.
thank you. If you were the person who asked that, please come and see me afterwards and we'll get your email address so Kate can...
It's on here actually, so
Oh,
all
it is,
good.
wonderful.
I will take this with me.
Wonderful. Managing our natural resources, this is for you, Kate, again, is of vital importance in times of climate change. The sustainable environment flow is our greatest natural treasure. The Murray-Darling River Basin has been reduced to a trickle compared to what was written into the MD Basin Act of 2007, I think it is. What will your party do to improve this in the near future?
That's a really good question, and absolutely right. The Murray-Darling Basin, what has happened there is a terrible thing for our entire country. and it is not functioning as a system as it should. So I'm not going to go through the specifics because I don't have that detailed policy with me today, but I would say that it's been mismanaged under the current government, who have really prioritised certain interests in that basin. What we would be doing is looking at it as a whole, rather than looking at it through the eyes of certain interests. And more broadly across our country, you know, we're in a biodiversity crisis at the moment. We are losing flora and fauna, and our river systems are overstressed. And, you know, we have a government that refuses to do anything about it. And in fact, you know, the government just commissioned a review of the EPBC Act nationally, and then they ignored most of the findings of that review. So Graham Samuel, very well-respected person, did a review of our environmental settings nationally, came back, the government legislated or is currently trying to legislate for things that weren't part of that review. And in fact, that review called for an independent cop on the beat, essentially, that we should have at a national level an authority that is looking out for our environment in terms of how we protect biodiversity, in terms of how we deal with some of these issues. So as a Labor Party, we've committed to that. Unfortunately, again, we don't have the numbers to have stopped what the Morrison government's doing with that at the moment, but it is a real issue, and it's one that we are certainly very aware of.
Thank you. The next question is for Ben. Ben, how can we ensure that Eltham retains its green wedge status when so much development is underway and planned? For example, the loss of many trees and a mass of concrete for the new multi-laned road at the gateway.
Well, sadly, one thing to note is Eltham is not actually green wedge, but we do see it as the gateway to the green wedge, and it always has been that sort of, it's an urban area, but it's still so leafy. I spoke before about, you know, amendments we're making to the planning scheme, long-term stuff, tree planting that we hope we can do. There is definitely a decline in tree canopy in Eltham. It is really sad to see. It's something council needs to address, but the mechanisms to address it are very complex. Seeing the trees come down at Fitzsimmons Lane was heartbreaking. And it's definitely something council tried to stop, but sometimes you just can't stop these things. The next stage in that project is the urban design framework. That, I think, is council's one chance to really have an impact with that project. What we can look at is tree planting to, well, not necessarily completely repair the damage that's done, but to at least limit it to the maximum possible extent. So we're really pushing hard on that. We are having issues where we feel that we probably won't be heard by Major Road Projects Victoria in terms of that urban design framework. So there needs to be, I think, a real push from both council and the community to make sure that they listen to us when they do that urban design report, so we can maximise the amount of tree planting that is done and the amount of greenery that's retained in the urban design. Look, in terms of protecting the green wedge areas next to Eltham, and I think this is an important point, while Eltham is not green wedge, it's the gateway to the green wedge, and a lot of the nature that you see around Eltham is recharged and serviced by the green wedge that we have right next door. So this council is going to prioritise our green wedge. I want to see us review our green wedge management plan, which will be done in line with some work that's being done by the state government. And that will allow us to protect tree canopy in the rural areas, protect wildlife in the rural areas, and that wildlife and that vegetation services the environment here in Eltham. So that it's a very, very complicated area and something I can't really fully cover here, something I don't fully understand myself, but we are working on it. And I probably should hand to Vicki as well to talk about the...
Sure. So I think that everybody does find trees coming down in this community incredibly confronting. And, you know, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, when my family first moved here half of those houses that are on the hills behind us didn't exist. It was private bushland. It was private large blocks that had bushland, and we've continued to grow here. And we do need to have infrastructure that not only responds to the growth that we have over the last 30, 40 years, but also the growth that is happening around our state and including to our north. But I agree with Ben, there is continued conversation and work to go on around the urban design plan. And I'm pleased that our MRPV are open-minded and are listening to people. They're having almost weekly conversations with ECO, among others, working towards how we can make the best of what it is. I'm also pleased that there will be around 6,000 odd, including the plants that Rotary and other community groups will plant, as well as what MRPV will plant. There will be a lot more trees planted in this community that will help restore a canopy. Now, whether it is exactly there, it won't be in the middle of a non-existent roundabout, but there will be replacement of canopy and, in fact, additional canopy. And what we can do in planting those trees is ensure that they are as local, Indigenous to the community as possible, and where that isn't possible, that they are at least native plants. So there were some lovely important trees that were at that roundabout, but there were also invasive species at that roundabout, and plants that should not have, with a concerted, comprehensive planning process of those trees, would not have normally been put there. So there is an opportunity for us to create some additional habitat, to create some opportunities where we can improve that corridor as it will become, but also other parts of our community.
Keep holding the microphone, Vicki. What concerted efforts are being made by the state government to allow people to make the switch to active transport?
Oh, I love this question.
That's why I asked it.
Who's the person who asked that question? Where are you?
Sophie?
Okay, I love active transport. Oh, it's okay.
It was me.
That was you? Great. There's lots of things that the state government is doing, but also that we can do as communities. So it is around looking at, so for example, I'm about to chair a committee that is looking at e-scooters and how a trial of that being rolled out over the next 12 months will work with the commercial providers like Lime and others who will be operating those. It is around helping to fund pathways and so on, as we've seen with the state government funding for Nillumbik's path to extend the Diamond Creek Trail, going from Diamond Creek to Hurst Bridge. It is about creating more opportunities for people to use their bikes, to store them at our trains and so on. But it is around having that conversation with community and how they can see themselves walking more, but how we change behaviours. So it is really interesting that one of the things that prevents people from walking is their idea of not being safe, especially women and of nights and of an evening and so on. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing where you feel safer when you've got lots of people around you, but you can't have lots of people around you if they're not walking. So there are strategies to be put in place that we are working on to continue to help people be a part of that that movement of getting more people walking, of getting more people using scooters and bikes and so on. We saw last year how much people actually do like walking and how much they like using walking to socialise. It is about capitalising on those changes of behaviours and getting people to embrace them and to continue them. So active transport is a really exciting area, and it's something that the state government is doing work on, and I'm happy to provide that person with a lot more detail since she's gone and I'm not really talking to her anymore. But there are some really good things happening. Working with Banyule Council about doing a pilot program with the local primary school of how we can address the car parking and school drop-off issue, and how we can create a couple of different projects around active transport of getting kids to use their own legs to get to school rather than mum or dad dropping them off in the car.
Thank you. You want to hand it to Ben? Lovely. Sorry, Kate. The next one. Almost, yes. Almost says all your ideas for the climate action plan sound common sense and positive. How can we help you get them all included in the final plan?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Good question. This is the first plan I've been, I guess, really heavily involved in writing as a councillor. Normally these plans get written by the officers, so it's a learning curve for me, just as much as anyone else. Look, we will be opening up to public submissions soon. So, or not soon, but we will do it in the next few months, I believe. make a submission. So keep an eye on the Participate Nillumbik website, which Frances showed everyone during her talk. And when it comes up on the Participate Nillumbik website, just have your say, mention the things that you want to see in the plan. It will have already been drafted by that stage, but if you see things missing, if you see things you want to change, mention them, and that can all form part of the process. Email your local councillor. So I'm the councillor for Sugarloaf Ward, which is research out to St Andrews and Christmas Hills. We have other councillors across Nillumbik. There are 7 of us. So email the other councillors, put forward your views. Be part of the conversation with your councillors, with the community, and through that consultation process as well. I think that's the best way to get all those things into the plan.
My final question before we have some afternoon tea for each of you. Not party politics, but how do we as community support you and your voice in getting our work done on this issue?
I would say keep doing what you're doing. For me, standing up in the federal parliament and advocating for action on climate change is grounded in what my community tells me, and my community tells me very clearly that they want action and that they know how important this is. So keep talking to us and keep telling us how important this is.
Yeah, I think the question is also how we can help you, how we can help you continue to do what you're doing, how we can help promote events like this one, how we can help you have conversations with your community, how we can help inform you to let you know the kind of things that are going on and what is needed and what isn't needed. So one of the things, for example, I have an email newsletter that goes out about every 6 weeks that gives people an update as what is happening with the state government in terms of addressing climate change, environmental news and so on. If you want to subscribe, let me know. But it's about helping you get the information that you need to talk to other members in the community, to engage with them and help them understand the things that are being done, but also what needs to be done and why it's important to you. How can we help you communicate with your community, your neighbours, about why this is important to you, why it matters?
Thanks. I get the good microphone. I think this one's better. Look, I think events like today are brilliant. It's having the conversations. It's it's talking to your neighbours and your friends, and making people aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. If we can get some really positive actions into the climate plan, if we can start doing special charge schemes to get everybody onto solar, talk to your neighbours about why you want your street to go onto solar. Because generally with a special charge scheme, you can to an extent force people into it, but it requires about a 60% vote from the people involved. So talk to people, get them on board, make sure people want to move to renewable energy, renewable, cheaper energy. Really have those conversations, get people on board, and promote what we're doing. Get involved with local groups. So we've got some fantastic local groups, Clean Energy Nillumbik, who do some really good work on the ground, helping people to make that transition to renewable devices in their homes, renewable energy. We've got other, groups focused on lobbying, such as Nillumbik Climate Emergency Action Team. There's just so much you can get involved in. Keep focusing on that, keep doing what you're doing. And as I said before, make submissions to the Climate Change Action Plan when we put it up on the council website.
Thank you. Our time has come to an end. I want to thank each of our politicians for coming and sharing. But more importantly, I want to thank you for coming along, asking your questions, getting involved. Thank you to everyone for all your work. We do have a little thank you. John? Thank you for the work you have done. Keep doing good work, and we're watching. Will you join us for afternoon tea? Thank you very much. And we have another seminar in May. Information is out the front. I'd love for you to look at it, and we'll hand some things to you. Come and join us for afternoon tea. Yeah.